Can the cloud gaming service Shadow PC run Star Citizen? That is the topic of today's video. Let's get straight into it. This story starts about 7 months ago in December. I tried out cloud gaming over the internet with Parsec and Paperspace, which combine to do something similar to Shadow. You give you a full Windows machine over the airwaves is the wrong word, over the cables, over the fiber optic, and it gives you a full machine that you have access to. It's different from Stadia, it's different from GeForce Now. You don't have to just use the games that they install or allow you to install. You can use Windows and install anything you want on it effectively, which allows you to play Star Citizen. Back then I tried that. Results were bad. They weren't good. It wasn't powerful enough, really CPU bottlenecked. But at the same time, I actually set up my Shadow subscription. The downside was I'm gonna have to wait 7 months for it to actually be activated because they had so much demand. Fast forward to now, I've got my subscription. A lot of things have happened in between. So they've doubled the price. So Shadow is now $29.99 rather than $14.99 when I first signed up. The parent company has gone bankrupt. They've been bought out by another company, but here we go. We're in, and here is Shadow. Is it worth it? Let's have a quick look at the stats before we load it up. 1080, very nice. 4 cores, 8 threads of no description. 12 gigs of RAM, which is less than CIG recommends as the minimum spec, and then a solid state drive. Let's open up Shadow and just show you the app. So we're on my Windows machine on my desktop. I've downloaded the Shadow app. You start the app and it will then prepare your system. And once it's ready, you can load in. You've got some options here, things like bandwidth. You can set Shadow to sort your graphics drivers out, a few things like that. But here we go, we're about to get in. You click, it prepares it, and then once you're in, you have your own full Windows desktop. You might notice at the top that it's actually picked up my joystick from my Windows machine. That's pretty impressive. Also, it's setting up a game controller as well there. Let's have a quick look at the CPU because that's the most interesting thing. It is a Haswell era Xeon, and it's actually an OEM model that's been slightly tweaked, so there's not really much information about it on the internet. But we do know that the actual CPU itself is a 12-core, 24-thread CPU. But in this case, we're only actually getting access to 4 of those cores and 8 of those threads. So it's being split up on this server somewhere that it is in some massive server farm, and we are getting access to a quarter of its resources. Let's have a quick look at Cinebench, and I've compared the Shadow machine to my 5900X system as well as my minimum spec system, which has got an i5-8400 in. And you'll see the CPU score, the top one is for multi-thread, and then the second single core one shows you a single core result. And as you'll see, we are way behind here on the Shadow, even compared to the i5-8400. It is going to struggle for single threaded performance. Let's get into some Star Citizen benchmarks, which is obviously why we're here. First up, it's worth just saying again, I'm comparing this with my main system, the 5900X with the 3080 and 32 gigs of RAM, as well as my minimum spec system, which is an i5-8400 with 16 gigs of RAM and a 1066 gigabyte. So let's see, we're looking at ArtCorp here, and we're going to do this as I sometimes do, in starting with the good results and then getting progressively worse. And this actually is playable performance, and this is as good as it gets. But we've got 30 FPS here, and we're looking at ArtCorp. There's not much going on. But if you look at the stats here, you'll see that the 1080 is not being loaded at all. The GPU load is 40% on average. So it's really, really being hammered on the CPU end, as we kind of expected. The 1080 is just sitting there doing not really that much. Next on to Calliope, and we'll see here a decent result again. Partly because Calliope is really quite a GPU heavy area of the game, and actually there's something for the 1080 to do. So you'll see here we're at an average of 55% GPU load, but we're still actually below the 1060, which obviously doesn't really make sense. But what's actually happening is that the CPU on the minimum spec system, the i5-8400, is allowing the 1060 to go higher than the 1080 is able to go on the Shadow machine. Next up, we're in space, which again is an area of the game that really doesn't push the CPU very much because there's not really anything going on. And we are again just about hitting 30 FPS, which is good. But as again, you'll see, being absolutely decimated by the minimum spec system, more than double the performance with a GPU that's 2 classes lower. Again, the CPU is really holding back the Shadow machine. Quantum travel, which as I always say, pushes the GPU slightly more with all the quantum travel effects. You'll see though that the 1080 again is only at 50% usage, and we're below the 1060 i5 combo above in my minimum spec PC. Now, all the testing I've done today has been on 3.13.1, the live patch, but I've dipped into the PTU, 3.14 PTU, just to have a quick look at the clouds on Orison. And as you'll see here, bad performance, but it's not actually down to the clouds. In most cases, Orison is really hard to run because of the GPU. The cloud effects are really brutal. But here, once we've gone into a city, there's lots more going on for the CPU to manage, and we're down to 15.6% average on the Shadow machine. The i5 8400 is really being hammered on the GPU side of things. That's completely maxed out, but our 1080 here on the Shadow machine, it's only at 35% load. Next up, Area 18, the Plaza, and it's the same story, massively CPU bound. Performance is roughly half of the minimum spec system and way behind the 5900X system as well. So you could see here just the effects of a really good CPU. That top result is significantly better, and it's just down to the CPU. Lorville, and it's the same story, very poor CPU performance, and yeah, it's just unplayable. 15 FPS is obviously just an average of the frames that you get in. You get some that are higher than that and some that are lower than that, and it's just not usable at all. Lastly, we'll have a look at Wally's bar, and it's obviously not good at all. I think probably this is the hardest part of the game for a CPU currently. As you'll see, even with the 5900X system, 41 average is not great, and the minimum spec system is barely playable at 20 FPS there. But yeah, the Shadow PC is just really chugging here, and the only way that you'd be able to play on the Shadow, I think, realistically, is just to avoid cities and big landing locations completely, which isn't really viable. Now I want to actually look at some footage in game with the Shadow. So this is a screen recording done with my main system, so it doesn't affect the performance. We've loaded in, I've sped all that up. It does take quite a while, but then you'll see here, we have loaded in, but we haven't completely loaded in. So this is Orison, and we are waiting for a combination, I guess, of the RAM, the CPU, and they're saying it's a solid state drive. I don't know, I'm not completely convinced. But you'll see just a general jitteriness, low frames in general, and really, Star Citizen is so unique. Shadow, it was never kind of anticipating a game like Star Citizen that is so CPU heavy. Shadow's really put all its resources into the GPU. To get a 1080 is really great. A 1080 is a great GPU still, but they were not anticipating a game like Star Citizen that would be so heavy on the CPU, and yeah, as you'll see, it's just no good at all. It would only be good to do some sightseeing, and you couldn't really do any of the gameplay in the game. You wouldn't want to do anything like combat in this. You wouldn't want to do any mining, any sort of jitter there, stutter. You've blown yourself up with a rock or anything like that. There's all sorts of things that you wouldn't be able to do, and considering it's £30 a month, it's just not going to be a good solution for anybody, I don't think. Especially when the minimum spec PC that I built didn't cost too much money. So what to make of all this? Well, let's do the positives first. As a platform, as an app, both on Windows and I've tried it on the Chromebook, it's flawless there. It works really well. So Shadow is a very simple, you turn it on and it just works. There's no fiddling around. For my situation with my internet connection, it's been completely flawless. So there's no complaints there. And obviously for lots of games, that would make it a really viable solution. So say you're traveling around, you've not got access to a gaming machine. If you wanted to log in and play some games from a hotel or something like that, as long as you've got a decent internet connection, Shadow would be a great solution. Obviously the price, £30, it's not that cheap, but in some scenarios you probably would recommend that to people who just wanted a bit of gaming on the go. But with Star Citizen, there's just no way I can recommend it, and as you've seen from the numbers and just how it plays, it just doesn't work very well at all. Obviously the GPU is more than enough. The RAM is under minimum spec, but you can get past that with page file. But the CPU is a real showstopper. It's just so slow, and you've seen the Cinebench scores there, just seeing how much slower it is than even the i5 8400 in the minimum spec system that I've got. We're talking quite an old CPU that was never designed to boost particularly quickly or designed really for gaming. So it's really quite difficult to recommend it for Star Citizen. The only thing that might change this scenario is what we always talk about, is that CIG are implementing their Gen 12 renderer and Vulkan, which should allow some of the kind of GPU draw calls and things like that to be, rather than just being done on one thread, being spread across the whole CPU. I don't know if that made much difference here, because the CPU actually was the numbers were quite high in terms of utilization, so I don't know if there's much more to give, but in theory that may change the picture a little bit and it may make it more playable, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. If you've enjoyed the video, give it a like. I'd love you to subscribe if you want to see more of this kind of technical look at Star Citizen, and I'd love to hear any comments from you if you've used Shadow or other cloud gaming services with Star Citizen and see how you found it. But that's it, see you soon.